Eugeniusz Romer, witam Państwa i zapraszam na kolejną ciekawą rozmowę w ramach konferencji Three Seas One Opportunity, która tym razem odbywa się w Gdańsku. I tym razem moim gościem jest dr James Carafano, który jest wiodącym ekspertem w dziedzinie bezpieczeństwa, pracującym dla Heritage Foundation. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, good to be with you.
So, I would like to ask you about the system of Bretton Woods, and by Bretton Woods I mean the freedom of navigation which the US provides. So, do you think this is still profitable for your country?
Absolutely. First of all, I think freedom of the seas in modern terms is really what we call freedom of the commons. So it's the ability not just to transit common waters, but also airspace, cyberspace, yeah, and increasingly the freedom to have people's infrastructure left alone, pipelines and other things. And so I actually think this is more important than ever for the United States. Look, one is U.S. is a global power with global interests and global responsibilities. Nobody benefits more from a peaceful world than we do, and so nobody should be a greater advocate for that. And we have, I think, the most dramatic thing that's going on in the world today, and the most consequential, is not so much even the rise of China. It's really the kind of the collapse of the post-Soviet space, really the collapse of the imperial space where Russia really had significant influence. And I think the most beneficial thing is if we could connect all these free and open spaces, and I think it would give nations really, for the first time really since the end of the First World War, an opportunity to choose for themselves who they do business with and how they do business. So that's why projects like the Three Seas Initiative, which connects just not the Three Seas and the land masses in between, but connecting that to a free and open Black Sea, that then connects to the Middle Corridor, Caspian Sea. That in turn connects through the Middle East to really to bringing India and Japan, Korea, Taiwan, other nations into the global economy. And then you really also have the capacity to kind of re-engage with Africa in a more realistic way with North and East and West Africa. What that really does is it's connecting the natural pathways of connectivity of the Eurasian continent, which have been there for most of human history, except when they were disrupted by the First and Second World War and the Soviet Union. I think that is greatly beneficial to the United States. So absolutely, I think freedom of the commons is going to be a critical interest in the United States in the long term.
So you say that you have, as the United States of America, great responsibilities as the most powerful country in the world and in history. But in one of your articles, recent ones, which I've read on the website of Heritage Foundation, you wrote that America should not be a babysitter to other nations, but it should not be also isolated. So what's the role of modern America in the world?
Well, I think it's to look after American interests. I mean, I think that's the responsibility of all governments, to really look after the welfare of their people and provide the opportunity for human flourishing. This is why I think the idea of free and open spaces is so critical, because it doesn't require the United States to babysit the world. It doesn't require huge armies and everything else. It's really enabling countries to kind of look to their own future. So I think it's mutually respectful and partnering, and good for the U.S.
Yeah, some people say that U.S. is quite self-sufficient in terms of critical supplies, in terms of, for example, energy, commodities like oil and gas, mostly due to shale extraction.
Right.
But how about semiconductors and rare earth? How this freedom of commons, as you mentioned, as you called it, helps United States to function, actually?
Well, I mean, I think anybody is stronger if you can diversify and if you have resilient, redundant supply chains. So that just, I think, makes sense for everyone. And the United States it's also important as an exporter. I mean, I think a lot of countries benefit from energy exports from the United States. So I think the U.S. has a lot to offer there as well. Look, the reality is what really knits the world together. And it's not globalization in the sense it's all these global institutions. It's just people connecting around the globe. And the three great lily pads are really Western Europe, the greater Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific. And so it's in the U.S. interest that these areas really kind of be, stable, right? It doesn't mean they have to be the land of milk and honey. You can't have any wars, but the U.S. benefits from stability in all those regions. What greatest contributes to stability is the connectivity between them, and that's why I think the strategy of connecting free and open spaces, whether it's free and open Indo-Pacific, the Mediterranean, free and open Black Sea, and the other seas, I think that all just makes sense for the United States.
So I can understand, for example, Indo-Pacific because
Right.
there's Taiwan and there are
Right.
semiconductors which are crucial to American economy. But how about Europe? Why is Europe so important for the US? So I mean, you have a lot of disputes with European countries over, for example, subsidies, over military spending, over US presence in Europe. Some countries want to be self-sufficient, like France
Right.
manifested very open. So why Europe?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty self-evident. There's a war in Ukraine. The United States can't turn their back on that because that affects the stability of all Europe, and that's critical to the United States. Same thing with the Middle East. How many times have we seen American administrations say, "Well, we're just not going to do anything in the Middle East," and we're right back where we started, and we're doing things and partnering with Israel. And even in the Pacific, look, people get Taiwan wrong. It's not semiconductors or democracy that makes Taiwan really critical. What makes Taiwan really critical is the critical island in the island chain. So these are
strategically.
Exactly. And so if China controlled that island chain, the first island chain, U.S. essentially would be blocked out of the Pacific. I mean, and there would be no free and open spaces. So the independence of Taiwan, the fact that the Chinese military doesn't control Taiwan and the sea is absolutely crucial to the United States having freedom and everybody really having freedom of navigation across the Pacific Ocean. So the reality is you can have any politics you want. Be my guest, but geography doesn't change. And until geography changes, the United States doesn't really have a choice about whether we're going to be engaged in Europe or in the Middle East or in the Indo-Pacific. Even this thing about, well, we should pivot because China's a big problem, we should pivot to Asia. This really is kind of nonsensical. 70% of the U.S. Navy is in Asia. So there's no Navy to pivot because it's already pivoted. Right, and if you took the other 30%, then we wouldn't be able to do anything in the world. 90% of the U.S. Army is in the United States, permanently stationed in the United States, and we don't really have an army big enough to have an army majorly pre-positioned in any theater. Doesn't matter where our Air Force is, because our Air Force deploys globally, so it's actually good that it's spread all over the world, and our Space Force is in space, so that doesn't count. So the U.S. doesn't really have this luxury of kind of ignoring critical theaters. So this notion that somehow the United States is going to lose Europe is
politics, because you mentioned politics.
Yeah.
So I will obviously ask about Donald Trump. Do you think he thinks this way, as you mentioned, about, for example, Ukraine or Europe?
Yeah.
Because we had we heard a lot of disputes. We saw tariffs imposed on European steel and this kind of issues. So do you think Donald Trump really is willing to contribute to this world order?
Well, first of all, I don't believe in the world order. I don't think any right person does, because there is no world order. There's nations that look after their interests. Joe Biden has imposed more tariffs on the world than Donald Trump ever did. And so that somehow Donald Trump is the enemy of free trade is just kind of nonsensical. Matter of fact, Trump did more trade deals than Joe Biden ever did. So this is just politics of nonsense. Of course, Trump's not going to abandon Europe. First of all, if he was going to abandon Europe, he would have abandoned it when he was president. I mean, nobody tells Donald Trump what to do. So Trump was one of the first world leaders to support Sweden and Finland joining NATO. He wouldn't be doing that if he planned on leaving NATO. A bill would not have passed in our Congress, this last round of $60 billion, if Trump had opposed that. So, I mean, this is a very simple thing to do. Okay, explain to me how the U.S. is better off if Russia controls Ukraine in any scenario, in any way. And the answer is there is no way in which the United States is better off if Russia controls Ukraine. So no American president, least of all Donald Trump, is going to just throw Ukraine overboard. Just makes no sense.
But if it comes to NATO, there were some speeches given by Donald Trump that he said he's not going to support the countries that are not contributing at least 2% of their GDP into security. So was it just a bargain strategy, or? Well,
people see what you have to look.
Because he's a businessman.
No,
right?
no. It's not being a businessman. Like, people just put their own context on it, and they don't put the context on it. So for example, like, I'm not going to support you if you don't pay 2%. Okay, what does that actually mean? Canada doesn't pay 2%. If China invades Canada, is the United States not going to support Canada?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm asking.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, if all the countries that aren't paying 2%, they're behind the countries that are paying 2%. So how would that work? Would the countries that pay 2% just step out of the way and let the Russians invade them? Here's what Donald Trump is saying, and he was being really clear. And it's not about leaving Europe. It's about countries in Europe have not stood up for the responsibility to defend themselves, and they need to get serious about that. And if they didn't hear that message, 4 years ago when he was president, before Ukraine was invaded, they damn sure ought to pay attention to it now. That's what he's saying.
So do you think that Poland would be defended by the U.S. under Trump, or whatever, under Joe Biden and anyone else, if was attacked by Russia? And do you think this is plausible that Russia may attack Poland or any other country in the Three Seas region?
Well, if we do this right, I don't think Russians threatening NATO territory is credible. Look, if you have, Russia now has 1,000 miles of front that they didn't have before. If you have Finland and Norway on one flank, and you have a strong Ukrainian military, an independent Ukraine on the other flank, whether they're in NATO or not, and a strong Poland and anchored in Romania, there's no place for the Russians to go. I mean, they can't attack through the Baltic states. That'd be like attacking down a little alley. They'd all die. So I think conventional deterrence is well within grasp. And, the most like-minded countries that view the world the way Donald Trump views the world are Poland, Romania, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. These are not the countries that he has a problem with. Matter of fact, if every country had defense policies like Poland and Romania and Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Trump would be the happiest guy on earth.
So, mentioning Three Seas Initiative, do you feel this is still a viable initiative? Because there are a lot of differences between, for example, Poland and Hungary and Slovakia,
right, sure.
and the Baltics and the countries in the Balkans. And but in one article, recent one in a Heritage Foundation, you gave example of Polish-Italian cooperation. So it's kind of alternative for the cooperation with China with the Belt and Road Initiative.
Right.
So do you think this is really something that is going to work?
Well, I would say two things. One is, again, we're a 50-50 country, so who knows who's going to be president, right? But if Donald Trump is elected president, he was deeply enamored with the Three Seas Initiative as a self-help project of Europeans helping themselves, and he wanted to be deeply supportive of that. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be deeply supportive of it again. And I would agree with you. There's lots of difference between a Slovakia and a Hungary and a Poland and a Romania. Get all that. But do any of them not want to have prosperous economies? No, they all do. Do any of them not want to be secure and have secure borders? Yeah, they all do. So I think there's plenty of a foundation for cooperation.
Okay, let's discuss the U.S. military, because
Sure.
I read one of your some kind of reports about military posture of the United States. I think it's dated for 2023. So it says your military posture is categorized as weak.
Right.
So it says you could handle maybe one major war, or maybe a little bit more, but if you had to maintain your presence in various parts of the world, it would be very hard. So do you think that America is actually capable of helping Poland in a case?
Well, I mean, this is where I think we're friends and allies are so important, and we all have a burden to bear. I think together, if you look at the capacity of like-minded allies in Indo-Pacific and in the Middle East and in the Atlantic community, together, we either have the capacity or potential capacity to defend all our vital interests. But the United States can't do it all. But we also don't have the luxury of abandoning any of these areas. So here's the problem: when we look at the world, we see the biggest threats as the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians. We probably could not fight all three of them simultaneously and win in all three theaters. All three of them would love to see a weaker America. None of the three want to have a war with America. So we want to keep it that way. So none of them individually could defeat us. In concert with our friends and allies, none of them have the luxury of thinking they can try to attack somebody while the United States is distracted somewhere else. I think that's the goal.
And if it comes to the security of the United States of America, you recently have written that next Pearl Harbor or next 9/11 is also possible if America is not prepared. So what do you mean by that?
So that's actually goes back to Ukraine. You know, there was a lot of concern in American conservatives on the voting the aid package for Ukraine. Had nothing to do with Ukraine. They were deeply frustrated that our president has wide open border policies. That is our great risk. I mean, and how do you go to a voter and say, I'm going to pay for this, but I'm not going to address that? I mean, to Americans, it makes no sense. So our anger really is with our government that they literally have created a massive economic security problem, fiscal security problem, terrorist security problem, and they've intentionally done it. It would literally be if Poland literally opened up its border to Belarus and let anybody walk in that wanted to. Nobody in Poland would say that that's a sane idea. And I have to, if it was a choice between supporting Ukraine and having to live with an open border of Belarus, I wonder what Polish voters would do.
Yeah, so there was a dispute over what we have to do with the refugees which are gathering at the border, but I think
the answer is simple: don't let them in.
Yeah, so the current government, even though when it was in opposition, was rather more compassionate, but now it's protecting borders because this is what the
because you know this isn't about refugees, and it's the same thing on our. These are weapons of mass migration. These are, I mean, particularly for your border with Belarus, these are people vacuuming up refugees, sticking them in Belarus, and wanting to send them into your country to destabilize your country. It has nothing to do with amnesty or refugee status or anything else. These are using beams as a weapon, and actually it's the same thing that's happening to us on our southern border.
One more problem about the U.S., I mean, fentanyl. And
right.
Do you think this is something that is really weakening America? Because 100,000 people a year in the recent years like died every year. So this is like very huge numbers, even for a country as big as America. So do you think this influences also economic posture, military posture? Because as far as I know, America lacks also people who want to join the military.
Look, I think the drug crisis is a major problem. The thing I would say about all of America's major is they're all fixable, and many of them are actually self-imposed. Right? The reason why we have a drug crisis is because we've opened the border up. We let the Chinese sell these precursors. We don't punish them for it. We do nothing to shut it down. If you want to look at why U.S. military enlistments are down, it's because people look at the military and they go, well, if you're going to just play politics with the military, why do I want to join the military? We have high energy prices. That's because we have stupid energy policies. We have an economy that's not working for everybody. We have high inflation. These are because we have ridiculous government spending policies. So, look, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I don't have a dog in the fight of who's president. But when you have policies that don't work and you change them and you have policies that do work, you get different results.
And who's going to be the president after the elections, the upcoming elections?
A Republican or a Democrat.
That's a good answer. Thank you very much. Dr. James Carafano, ekspert w dziedzinie bezpieczeństwa z Heritage Foundations. Dziękuję bardzo, że Państwo byli z nami i do zobaczenia.